Cullen Wines was planted in 1971 by my parents, Diana and Kevin Cullen, and they had a great dream to make the best quality wine sustainably. Cullen Wines is 5 kilometres from the Indian Ocean. We get the sea breezes coming in that cool the land and the people and the vines down in summer. The vineyard is now certified biodynamic, carbon neutral and naturally powered. We hand harvest everything, we hand sort everything, and we don't add any yeast or acid or malolactic. It is a completely pure expression of the land from which it comes. In the 47-year journey of Cullen from minimal chemical inputs to organic to biodynamic, this is the best fruit that we've ever seen. It's just such a wonderful, uplifting experience. Cullen Wines was planted in 1971 by my parents, Diana and Kevin Cullen, and they had a great dream to make the best quality wine sustainably. Cullen Wines is 5 kilometres from the Indian Ocean. We get the sea breezes coming in that cool the land and the people and the vines down in summer. The vineyard is now certified biodynamic, carbon neutral and naturally powered. We hand harvest everything, we hand sort everything, and we don't add any yeast or acid or malolactic. It is a completely pure expression of the land from which it comes. In the 47-year journey of Cullen from minimal chemical inputs to organic to biodynamic, this is the best fruit that we've ever seen. It's just such a wonderful, uplifting experience.
So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Hoping that I am viewable by you all, but welcome to this afternoon's Winemaker Zoom with Vanya Cullen of Cullen Wines. My name is Tim Schrook. I'm both the manager of the Wine Society's Tastings and Events team and also the token Aussie of the Society. As a result, it's my great pleasure to welcome Vanya to this afternoon's session. And thank you very much for joining us. Vanya has been a long-time supporter of the tastings at the Wine Society, and just last year hosted a lovely dinner at the Medlar, which was a huge success. So it was only natural to ask her to come and speak as part of this virtual tastings program. Just to cover a bit of housekeeping very briefly, the plan for the next hour, I will shortly pass over the proverbial microphone to Vanya to allow her to discuss her history, her background, the winery, and the wines that she produces. We will then open the floor to any questions that you may have, so please do ask questions as we go through. At the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A button. Please note that when you use that, your questions are not viewable by others, so you're allowed to ask anything at all. There is no such thing as a stupid question when it comes to wine. Unfortunately, if you do manage to actually ask a stupid question, my colleagues Anna and Catherine, who are in the background today, will vet those before we put them to Vanya. So please do feel free to be comfortable asking any question that you may have. If you'd like to make more general comments or just ask a question to the Wine Society staff, so we've got our Australian buyer, Freddie Bulmer, joining us today as well. Please use the chat function, which you'll also see at the bottom of your screen. That allows you to make any comment that everyone can see. Please though, just address it to all panelists and all participants. That ensures unfortunately, that is one thing that we can't have the ability to actually all taste together. But what we can do is allow Vanya to share who, the why, and how of her wine production. So Vanya, I'll pass over to you. And as I say, members, please do submit your questions, and we look forward to asking those at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Tim, and thanks very much for the Wine Society for asking me to be the winemaker session today. I remember it was in October last year that I was doing a tasting. I did a dinner at the Medlar, which was really wonderful, vertical tasting, and it's great to be talking to you on Zoom on a winter's night in Margaret River. So yeah, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the Wadandi people, the traditional custodians of the land where I am now and where our wines are made. And I'll just tell a little bit of the story about Cullen's and where we've come from and where we're going and where we are. You know, it was my 30th year last year of being a winemaker at Cullen's, and it's been a wonderful journey to be blessed to have, you know, incredible parents like my mother and father, Diana Madeline and Kevin John. And they both were, you know, really great visionaries and wanted to make great wine sustainably. And to that end, we now are, you know, a certified biodynamic carbon positive, where our soils and vineyards are sequestering more and holding more carbon than our whole business emits, which I think is really important to talk about in terms of where we are with making, you know, the best quality wine in a sustainable way in this environment. So the Mum and Dad were actually involved in the initial plantings in Willyabrup sub-region in 1966, and then they went on to plant the existing vineyard at Cullen's in 1971. So next year is our 50th. And I know it's not very long in terms of Indigenous sustainability of 50,000 years, but or so, but it certainly feels like it's, you know, it's been a really great journey, and to be able to be there for, you know, probably about 37 years of it is a great sort of feeling and a sense of meaning. So Mum always said quality, not quantity, and we pretty much stuck to that with the sustainability aspect of our vineyard making, I believe, better quality wines. And I'll talk to you as to why that is, because everything happens in the vineyard. The ancient soils, the Willyabrup was sort of chosen as a sub-region within Margaret River in the beginning by John Gladstone. He pinpointed as being, you know, all of Margaret River being good, but he thought Willyabrup had particular potential. It's sort of in the middle of the region. There is a GI application into Wine Australia for that at the moment. But it's, you know, you've got the really old, and I know a lot of you have been to Cullen's and been to Margaret River. I know Freddie came last year, which was great at this time to have him there and to show him around. But you know, you've got these really ancient soils that have, you know, the 500 million year old granite rocks and the lateritic ironstone, and then it goes on to ironstone and clay, and really old worn down land that when the early settlers came out in the after the First World War, they were promised land that was, you know, like milk and honey, and there was, you know, great for growing cattle. But in actual fact, the land was so old that it wasn't very good for agriculture, and they all the farmers pretty well walked off the land during the Depression. But what wasn't good for agriculture was great for quality wine production. And the property, when we bought it, just had ringbark trees, and because the people that owned it before us didn't have enough money to do anything else. So we planted the Riesling and Cabernet Sauvignon in the first instance in 1971, and then in 1976 we planted the rest of the varieties. They're all on their own roots, and that means that I think we have really great authenticity of wine. It took us probably until 1979 to get a decent crop, and that is you know, testament to the soils and how old they are. And then we started to get a decline in yield. So by the 90s, Mum and I sort of thought, well, maybe we'd tried everything that we could with respect to, you know, all the things that we'd been told to do, and organics was something that we hadn't been told, but we felt that that was the way to go. So we started our organic program in 1998, which meant we did cover crops and organic, put in composts, and then became a certified organic property in 2003, and that was the year that my mother passed away, and the 2001 Diana Madeline was the first Diana Madeline we released, and so we went to a Biodynamic forum, and it just really felt like the right thing to do. And so we see Biodynamic as a step up from organic, in that if you're organic, you're not biodynamic, but if you're biodynamic, you're organic. And we often get asked, what are the differences between biodynamic and organic? And the difference in our certification is the use of the preparations 500 and 501. 500 is, of course, cow manure, which is put into a cow horn and buried under the ground on the winter solstice, which is what we did actually on Sunday. It was pretty amazing to have a beautiful sunny day in the middle of winter to be able to do that. So we get the cow manure from our own cows, and we get the cow horns from the abattoirs. So that they're buried at about 65. We put in about, I think Matt, our vineyard manager, calculated it was 500 cow horns at 200 kilograms each, and then it was I think it was 100 kilograms that it was a big haul of 500. So that's really fantastic to get that in the ground and then have the rain. And so what that really is 500 is microbiological life. So if you put chemicals onto land, you not only stop 50% of carbon sequestration, but you kill all the microbiological life. And there's more understanding about how that affects everything. By how we know that probiotics, if we have good gut health, we have a good brain. And we look at it with the putting on of the 500, which is basically pure microbiological life. Like a teaspoon will have billions of microflora. You dynamize that in water and put it onto the ground on when moon is opposite Saturn. And why moon opposite Saturn? Because, which happens once a month, the moon brings in calcium and fertility, and Saturn brings in silica and structure and minerality. So you have this activation at that time. So you spray that onto the ground at about 85 grams per hectare, and you get it's the intelligence in the soil. So the the internet highway under the ground of all those microbes speaking to each other. It's like having a community of a network with the root systems and all the microbes communicating, and then that gives you healthy soil, and the vines are more able to uptake all the nutrients, and then healthy vines, and then of course healthy grapes. The other part of our certification is 501, which is ground down quartz silica. So the quartz silica comes off our property, and we just literally pound it into a pulp in very fine powder, and as the cow manure 500 goes into the ground on the winter solstice, the 50, and comes out on the summer solstice. The winter solstice has the strongest earthing and water energies, and the summer solstice has the strongest air and fire. So as we take the 500 out in the summer, we put the 501 in, and the 501 is sprayed on the morning of moon opposite Saturn at a rate of 2 grams per hectare, and that's as an atmospheric spray, and that brings in sort of light and helps with the health of the vines. So we also use the preparations 502 to 508, which are the oak bark, dandelion, valerian, chamomile, yarrow, and we just finished before the guys went on holiday. After harvest, they made 70 tons of compost and left it sort of brewing. It's got a big blanket over at the moment. So we put on about 5 to 10 tons per hectare of compost as well after harvest, to give back to the soil what we've taken out from the harvested fruit. And our spray systems are sort of, we use seaweed, we use the barrel compost, which is cow manure, eggshells, basalt. With the preparations 502 to 507, we spray, yeah, we love the seaweed, is fantastic, and just generally giving tonics to the vine, and also sulfur. We haven't sprayed copper on our vineyard for about 10 years, and generally, you know, the costing is about quality production. The biodynamics often get asked, you know, is biodynamics more expensive? Well, quality wine production is expensive, and I don't think biodynamics makes that much of a difference, apart from, you know, we're doing a lot of work in the vineyard, and the actual manually working with the vines is what was cost. So all of that is working around the planetary cycle, a moon opposite Saturn. Of course, we've got, you know, perigees and apogees, full moon, new moon. And I had rather a wonderful, you would have had your summer solstice, we had our winter solstice with the new moon and the eclipse and all those incredible things going on. And it really is, you become aware of that. And we do all our harvesting on fruit and flower days. We love moon opposite Saturn as a day. We have the calendar here, which is the Brian Keats calendar that we work off, which tells us which days are what. But it's really been very transforming in terms of being a quality wine producer that has gone from minimal chemical inputs on the vineyard to and winery to basically adding nothing in the winery at all. And so in 1991, we started experimenting with Indigenous yeast in our Chardonnay, and by 96 we had 100% Indigenous yeast ferment in the Chardonnay, but it was only in the Chardonnay. And so we sort of jumped off the bridge in about 2006, because we really felt that well, the wines were better without any additions. You have a very pure line from the land to the glass, and you have that sense of aliveness. So the grapes are literally, for all of our wines, they're all made the same way. They're hand harvested around the lunar calendar, and brought into the winery. And I go and taste all the grapes every day during harvest to see when they're ripe, because I think the harvest decision is really one of the most important decisions during harvest for the winemaking process. That is that start. So they're brought into the winery. Everything is hand sorted, and particularly with respect to the wines that we've got tonight, and the wines that Tim and the guys have got on offer, the Kevin, John and the Diana Madeline. You know, they're old vine now, and they have their natural balance. The Chardonnays, the Kevin John Chardonnays, I think you've got the 15, 16 and 17. We get an average of around 2.88 tonnes per hectare over the 11-year average, which is very, very low. But what happens as a process of that is we have incredible concentration, and you know, we're not trying to make a manufactured wine, which is, you know, had a little bit of matchstick, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Yeah, that's a really lovely picture of a hand harvested bunch of Chardonnay grapes. They come into the winery like that. We whole bunch, we hand sort, of course, on the sorting table, and we whole bunch press. At harvest, people say, you know, we don't have a recipe for any of our wines. So the Chardonnay always comes in first, and we have quite a bit of time, because there's a bit of a lag time between other varieties. So we really make a huge effort with the Chardonnay, not that we don't with everything else, but it's always wonderful to have that time to spend with it. And we've been experimenting with amphora, clay amphora, whole bunch. So we do the 17 and 16 had some whole bunch clay amphora fermenting for a couple of days before they're pressed and go into barrels. And for the most part, we whole bunch press straight to barrel. We do have biodynamic barrels now as well, which is quite exciting, because we're harvesting, and everything we do in the winery as much as we can is around the biodynamic calendar. And so we also have been able to persuade some of our coopers to be able to make the barrels as biodynamic barrels. That means that we harvest, the wood is harvested on the fruit or flower day, and every aspect of the barrels making is on those days. What does this all mean in terms of fruit and flower? Oh, well, it's just about, because the wines have nothing done to them, they actually are very open and flexible to the planets. And we can, our cellar door manager, because he tastes the wines every day, can actually pick whether it is a fruit or flower day. You know, it's not that they're any worse. It's not that you can't drink on other days, but they do have different expressions on different days, and it's really wonderful to see that aliveness in the wine and how they change. So with the Chardonnay going into the barrels, we're using more puncheons now, more larger oaks. So when we say new oak, it can mean that we have you know, it's a less sort of contact of oak in a way, because everything that we're doing is about the fruit expression rather than having necessarily the you know, oak overloading the wine. We really want the balance of the vineyard to be talking rather than the oak. So the Chardonnays go through natural malolactic. I think the 15 and the 16 and the 17 all have gone through 100% malolactic fermentation naturally in the barrel, and 100% natural yeast fermentation as well. And under screw cap, I think the screw cap has been the biggest change for us in terms of quality and aging. Because you know, for our 40th, we looked at all the back vintage wines, and it really was a difficult story to tell. But under screw cap, we've got this and the biodynamics, they just seem to not age, they just keep going, and it's wonderful to be able to see that story of vintage, and also of vintage, and also the wine and what happens. So we make that choice as to, you know, how much oak or whatever at harvest, as well as with the Chardonnay. We have the amphora ferment with the whole bunch. We also have concrete egg ferment. So we have a 675 litre concrete egg, and that gives, because of the way the yeast distributes in the egg, it gives us really wonderful texture. So the whole bunch amphora gives a sort of a sprightly kind of fruity character, whereas the you know, the egg gives the texture. And then we have the barrel fermentation as well with the larger barrels and the biodynamic. So it's all this rather lovely activation of flavour for Chardonnay, and keeping that, you know, that they are wines of the land. They're not wines which are, you know, manufactured or, you know, winemaker wines in a way. They really are, we see ourselves as being custodians of the land in terms of the quality of the fruit and the wine style. And I think our Chardonnays have always, and the Kevin John Chardonnay's always been made that way, and we will continue to along that path, because it's the most natural, beautiful expression of place. So, and the other wines that we've got there, I think that's the 2012 East Block, which from Mangan Vineyard. So we have two different vineyards. That one there is shown in the picture is Cullen Vineyard, and that's on a beautiful winter's day, just about the same time as now. And it's a flagship of Mangan Vineyard. We've got Cullen Vineyard and Mangan Vineyard, which is right next door to each other. And Mangan was planted in 1995 to 97. And all of our fruit comes from either Cullen or Mangan Vineyard. We don't buy any fruit in. I have to have a little sip of wine, I think. And the Mangan Vineyard.
And if you'd like to just take a second, I can just yeah, talk whilst you go grab a sip of water if you need it. What you're seeing there is the Cullen Winery, and then what we can also show you is here are the soils that come from the where the Diana Madeline wine, the Cabernet blend comes from, which Vanya will share shortly. And then just a couple of photos going on from the biodynamic discussion here with the biodiversity there as well. and then some cover crops as well. So I think it looks like Vanya's ready to start again. So
yeah.
Sorry
about that. Yeah, so the Mangan East Block is a Malbec Petit Verdot one. We made this first in the 2000 vintage. Why did we make it? Well, for fun, really. We had these 3 varieties, Merlot, Malbec, Petit Verdot. And then as we understood more about the varieties, the Malbec gives the power and the push, and the Petit Verdot gives the line. We made a flagship wine from it. So this wine is the flagship. It's 54% Petit Verdot, 46% Malbec. That's generally about the blend. And it's I suppose it's our Pinot Noir in terms of our food and wine matching styles. But gorgeous sort of fantastic aging potential. 2012 was a great vintage for us. And it's really great to have a different style and flavour to the Cabernet Sauvignon. Of course, the Cabernet Sauvignon is king in Margaret River. And the vintages that the guys have got are fantastic vintages. 2017 was James Halliday's Cabernet Blend of the Year, and the 16, they're all around, 12.5% alcohol, which is a really interesting outcome of organic and biodynamic. We're looking for, I believe that the great Cabernets are elegant and medium body. They're not sort of huge and chunky and dense, and they have a wonderful perfume and a detailed, and have this length and vibrancy in them which make them alive rather than being heavy and alcoholic. And that's a really difficult thing to do. But in organic and biodynamic vineyards, you have a balance which is about physiological ripeness. So what does that mean? It means that you get the sugar, the acid, the tannin, the flavors, everything ripening at the same time. So and in an unbalanced vineyard, you get the sugars ripening before everything else. So the sugars, you have to wait until the tannins and the flavors all catch up. So then you have to back add water and acid and everything to keep that balance. So I think that they're really amazing, or have an alcoholic wine, and that's what the beauty of this site is under a biodynamic regime like we've got. That incredibly healthy, and the vine balance there is what makes the great wines from this vineyard and from the region. And I think that the best wines are yet to come, but great red wine quality is about the tannins. So you've got to have those fine tannins, and with Cabernets you can get really green wines, but you want some sort of tension between the sweet and the savoury, and having that, the typical flavour profile of our wines is you get the violets and the roses as a floral note, and then you'll get the dark fruits like the mulberry, red, plum, and then you go through to the bitter chocolate, which is what makes it such a great food matching wine, and then onto the red capsicum. And then you go down into the Einstone, which some people say that's where you get to taste the sea, because our vineyard is 5 kilometers from the sea, and you get that iodine sort of sea character. I see it as the iodine in the Einstone. And I mean, Einstone or gravel is of course a classic soil for great Cabernet Sauvignon. So I think those things, you don't often talk about reds as having minerality, but I think these wines do have that minerality. And as young wines, like if you look at the 17, you'll see the incredible sort of freshness of fruit, and then you go through all those layers down to the earth, and then you get into the older wines, you'll start seeing that more of the the earth characters, and then as it opens up, you'll get the fruit kind of making it alive. But they do evolve and grow and have that wonderful sort of ability to change in the glass. And it's always my great dream to have a dinner where you have all the glasses in front of you and the food gets brought in and out, so the wines can show how they can change with the food and also being opened. So it's a wonderful sort of thing to, and if you look back and you go back in history, back to the tastings that we've had back to the 70s, the wines are still very fresh, and it shows the pedigree of the site, I guess, that Mum and Dad chose. because they're still fresh, and it's also very humbling because the wines that they made are really, you know, really great. And I'd like to think that the wines that we make now with the biodynamics are more complete. We've got we've got wine going back to 1975. 74 was our first harvest, but it was all bird picked, so we threw it out, I think. And 75 was our first release. And the cork has played you know, quite a pivotal role in, and then screw cap, of course, in the quality of our wines. The 70s and 80s, we had very good quality corks, and then going into the 90s, of course, Australia had, as a country, had really bad cork issues. I guess the wine industry was expanding at a rate that was not able to keep up quality control. But then going into the 2001 Diana Madeline was the first screw cap red we did, and then 2002 whites, and from 2003 we had 100% screw cap. So it's wonderful to be able to have these wines, these back vintage wines under screw cap, and to be able to see that story of, you know, cork versus screw cap, and screw cap giving the story without a consistency of aging with, you know, the two wines of the Diana Madeline and the Kevin John. So the wine for tonight, the 2010 Diana Madeline, it's actually one of my favorite vintages, in that people always ask what's my favorite vintage. Well, every time I drink a wine, I think it's my favorite vintage, which is in terms of, because they all are very beautiful and uniquely express the place at that time. And I don't think there's any other product that does quite like that besides wine. But 2010 was a warm vintage, and the wines have always been very pretty and elegant, you know, and just always gorgeous, easy drinking. But, you know, people think when it was first released, they thought, oh, that wine's not going to age, but it just, you know, it's still incredibly fresh. You know, it's got harvested from the 12th of March to the 12th of April. No, sorry, wrong one. 2010. Just trying to get, it was a wine that, yeah, it's always had that beautiful, pretty character of, and now with 10 years bottle age, it's still showing quite a lot of primary fruit, and was harvested from the 1st to the 29th of March. That's good. So it's 13% alcohol, and it's just got such a perfume to it. It's amazing. I don't know if anyone else has got the wine, but it's just always So
Vanya, with our events today, we haven't really been focusing on too much tasting. However, for this event, we did suggest that we would be tasting this one together. And I know Freddie Bulmer jumped at the opportunity to have the excuse to open a bottle just to see where it was at, so he could taste along. So Freddie, do you have any comments you'd like to make on this one?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's a total joy to be able to taste this on a Wednesday lunchtime. It's not something that I do every Wednesday, I promise. But I actually hadn't tasted the 2010 vintage for a little while, so it was really lovely to be able to kind of come back to this wine and see how it's getting on. And one thing that's become quite obvious is the tasting note that you flashed up on the screen there, Tim, with the product on the website needs a bit of updating perhaps, because this is just developing beautifully. I mean, I've been writing a few notes about it while listening to Vanya, and the thing that strikes me with this wine is it's got this wonderfully sort of silky, velvety mouthfeel, and as you were saying, Vanya, it's not a big bruising, full-bodied Cabernet. It's much more sort of elegant than that. And it struck me as having this wonderful balance of freshness in terms of the structure. So the acidity there is still really wonderfully fresh, vibrant. You know, it's keeping this wine alive remarkably. But then the fruit is starting to show lovely signs of age, and it's got a lot of complexity there. And I wrote down things like, you know, there's a little hint of sort of leather mahogany, some really quite luxurious notes on the nose, but then it's still bursting with black fruit, and there's a lot going on. So it's I'm really looking forward to actually seeing how it continues to develop in the bottle. I'll probably not finish the whole thing off at lunch. Well, I'll try anyway, and come back to it this evening and see how it's opened up. So it's looking remarkable.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Thanks, Freddie. It's like that's a surprising thing, because they are, because they're lower alcohol, well, they're not lower alcohol, but they're, you know, not 14 or 15 or 16%. They have the aromatics. And so when they're first released, they're not quite so expressive as they become as they're evolving, and they keep that perfume and that vibrancy and that aromatic. And, you know, the tannins are there, the right tannins are there. And so they really frame that sort of that detail in the wine. And I can really taste the, you know, the ironstone soil in there, which I like, because it's such a Cabernet sort of thing, you know, and it's so beautiful. And today is actually a leaf day here. I don't know what it is over there, but so the wine to me is looking a little more closed than it would. I always like to keep these wines over a few days and have a look how they change too. It's quite interesting doing the isolating drinking in that sense, that you open wines, you know, and you keep going. But yeah, that is a really beautiful thing, that you don't expect that level of freshness and vibrancy, and you get surprised. And even now, I mean, I've looked at these wines over and over and over for all my life just about, and I am constantly surprised. And, you know, it's like, wow, that's really very, very gorgeous, and it's a nice drink too, because I think sometimes when you say Cabernet Sauvignon to people, you know, they might recoil a bit because they think of this wine that's, you know, going to take all their teeth out, or, you know, or burn the skin off their lining of their mouth. But it's you know, it's a wine which is it's almost like a Burgundy style Cabernet Sauvignon, in that it's so perfumed. And I think that, you know, that's the trick about Cabernet Sauvignon, is getting that physiological rightness, so you can get that balance from the vine. And that's it. It's like it's just such a blessing to go down that path and have those wines which, you know, you can go back to 1977. Well, we've only got about 3 bottles, and if they're good corks, and they're still fresh. It's incredible.
It's remarkable, isn't it? And it's incredible for a region which is still, relatively speaking, so young, to be able to make such incredibly sort of accomplished, complete, you know, such top level wines. I mean, it's really quite amazing. And I can't think of many other places in the world that have only been going for, you know, circa 50 years, or about 50 years, 40, 50 years, that are able to make such incredible wines. And one thing that I mean, as you mentioned earlier, I was lucky enough to be out there in Margaret River with you about this time last year, and I immediately fell in love with the place. And I can see why people decided to sort of, you know, hang around there, plant some grapes, see how they go. And because even if the grapes didn't work out, then it would have been an amazing place to stay. Because I remember I arrived in Margaret River on a flight first thing in the morning, flying into Perth from Melbourne. And bizarrely, I was on this plane with a load of Manchester United football supporters, which was not really what I wanted to be doing at sort of 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning. But I arrived in Margaret River eventually, and it was my first time being there. And it was just, I just immediately fell in love with the place. I got there, you know, early afternoon, didn't have a meeting for a couple of hours, and I went for a bit of a walk through the town, and I sat and had a beer, and I thought, yeah, this is the place, isn't it? And I knew from that point on that I was going to be impressed with it. It's like a paradise. One thing though, that I wanted to ask you about, Vanya, is, you know, obviously the Cabernet Sauvignon is very important for the red wines in Margaret River, and taking inspiration there from Bordeaux. But also for the whites, you know, Chardonnay is vital, and it's quite interesting for the reds to have taken inspiration from Bordeaux, and for the whites to have taken inspiration from Burgundy. And I just wanted to ask you, what is it about Margaret River that you think means that works so well?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it ties into it's Margaret River is a cross between Burgundy and Bordeaux in terms of its modelling as well, and so you have really people looking at, and that's where, you know, the Willyabrup GI and people looking more into the land, and what is the land giving is a very sort of Burgundian model, and then the branding is more of a Bordeaux model, and I think that's where we come in. But what is it actually within the region that gives that possibility? I think it is, you know, the ancient soils and the maritime, well, the actual natural beauty, which everyone loves so much, including me. I feel very blessed to be here. You know, the natural beauty of the region and that evenness of climate. And John Gladstone's really, I see John as the person of the catalyst for the whole region started when he wrote his paper in 1966. He said he didn't just do it as a scientific paper. He used to have his holidays as a kid down at Augusta, which is on the southern end, and he said he knew that for 6 weeks of every year when he had his holiday, there'd be this even climate, even weather. So, and that still happens. You know, we still have, I mean, we have a little bit of you know, push from climate change, but you know, it's still very even, the weather, and you know, it's sort of, and that's good particularly for Chardonnay because they don't like too much heat, and also it's good for Cabernet Sauvignon because they like that evenness of climate of the Mediterranean maritime as well. So, but I think also the Wente clone for the Chardonnay, you know, you've got the Wente clone, which is, you know, originally from Merceau, and then, you know, came through California and into Australia, which is a very low yielding clone, which most of the, you know, the top properties have that. And so you get that concentration of flavour. And also, you know, the clones of Cabernet, we've got about 8 different clones on our vineyard. I think most people are kind of the same. They've got a mix of, but I also don't want to underplay the influence of quality. You know, the first people here that planted grapes, you know, like Dad, Dr. Cullity, Dr. Pannell, all the doctors, you know, there's lots of them, all they wanted to make the best quality wine. And so it kind of started off like that. And but ultimately it comes back to the land. I mean, and so Cabernet and Chardonnay can grow very well. I think viticulturally, Cabernet is completely at home in Margaret River, whereas Chardonnay has, you know, it struggles viticulturally. It's a little not quite cold enough sometimes for it to go, but still it makes these great wines. So, you know, everyone carries on, and it's, you know, but Chardonnay grows well everywhere, really, doesn't it? There's a lot of places that grow really nice Chardonnay. Cabernet, I think, is, you know, as difficult to make a great Cabernet as to make a great Pinot Noir, because you have to get that, all of those tannins and the ripeness. It can be very green or very overripe, and so that balance is what you need to get right in the vineyard. And I think Margaret River has a lot of chances to do that. Yeah,
absolutely.
Thank you, Vanya. We're going to throw open the questions now from the members. So I'm going to ask a few members to ask questions, and I'll ask a few on their behalf as well. So if you do have a question, please do submit it. We do have quite a few, so we may not get to them all, but what we do is follow up each unanswered question through email. So please do submit any questions that you have. But I'm going to start with, I believe it's Nick Bacino. Are you there?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Far away.
Oh, right. Okay. Thanks for this, Hannah. It's really interesting. I've always been interested in, when I've done biodynamic wines, I do find that purity in the wines. I've always wondered how much of it down to the biodynamic processes per se, versus the presumably extra hours that's needed to produce wines using these methods.
Yeah, look, it's a good question, and I think, you know, people say, is it the biodynamics or the winemaker, you know, but we know, and it was interesting because John Gladstone's has always been not a supporter of biodynamics because he's a scientist. And recently when I went and saw him, he's an amazing man. He's in his 80s and he's got a mind like a steel trap. And, you know, he presented a book on biodynamics to me, and I was really amazed. And his reasoning was that with the microbiological life and the balanced soils, you get a balanced vine, and then you get balanced fruit. And that fruit is what makes the wine. So it's actually having that vine balance, which comes about through the biodynamics. And I think biodynamic, we see organic is, you know, is better than having, you know, fertigation and irrigation and pushing crops, because you have the balance too, but that microbiological life. But the biodynamic really creates this supercharged microbiological life. And so that is what creates in the vineyard, the wine, and then it's our role in the winery to just look after that, so we don't have to make any additions, because we don't have to correct for acid, we don't have to correct for tannin or anything. So I would say that in terms of, if you say a wine is more alive if you can take it from the land to the glass without doing anything to it, our wines are that, because we don't add anything or take anything away. Of course, the Dynamel and Kevin John have some sulfur dioxide, and the Kevin John a little bit of bentonite, but we're moving more away from trying not to add any. But the Dynamelons have no additions other than sulfur dioxide. So you think about that as an outcome of biodynamics. And I've seen the vineyard go from minimal chemical inputs when it was basically dying right through to biodynamics now, when it's absolutely thriving. We've got this carbon cycling happening with the cover crop and everything, and it's just so healthy. And in 2020 vintage, which was a bit of a drought year for us, we were blessed to actually have a harvest. We've got some incredibly concentrated, gorgeous wines, but not much of them. You know, our vineyard really held up. You know, it wasn't because the soils also have up to 50% extra water holding capacity with the compost, so they didn't stress that they're not irrigated. So that's another thing to look at in terms of biodynamics and composted soils. It's an integrated system of, you know, from earth to sky, about keeping that balance in the wine. Hope that answered the question.
Wonderful, thank you. Our next question comes from John Lamond.
John Lamond. Good afternoon. Greetings from Scotland. Does the malolactic Does the malolactic occur naturally 100%, or do you have to induce it?
It's natural. We don't add anything to the wine at all. We don't add any yeast, any malolactic, any acid. The only thing we add is sulfur dioxide to the red. So yeah.
You get 100% malolactic naturally.
Yeah, with everything. In fact, sometimes the malolactic goes through before the primary fermentation, which is incredible, really. You have the because normally what you'd expect the primary fermentation of the sugar fermenting to alcohol to finish first, but it doesn't happen. And you just get used to going, well, that's okay. It's just like part of the season, you know. And we know that we've got, in our vineyard in 2008, we had 600 different strains of Saccharomyces yeast. And in the winery, we had 400 different strains. And so the wines get fermented by about 80 different yeast strains. And so it's like, we haven't done what malolactic cultures there, but when you have, you know, alive systems that don't have chemicals on the land to kill things, you've got this whole aliveness happening, you know, all the time. And so yeah, it's just, we're lucky to have good yeast strains in our winery. I guess we've always had really good hygiene, and so at Touchwood, and so, but yeah, it's sort of, there always is a little bit of a risk there of what's going to happen, but it makes wines which are really resilient and are unique to that place, in the sense that the yeast and the malolactic culture are part of the terroir.
Great. I hope that answers your question there, John. The next question I'm going to ask on.
Did that answer the question? Yeah, I sort of just stopped, didn't I?
No, I think it was great. Next question comes from Ian McKenzie, who can't join us now, but emailed in advance. And he asked, and it's a question that we actually have had with just about every presentation and event we've had so far, and it's asking what other wines you might have a soft spot. So any regions, either within Australia or around the world, what wines tend to find their way into your own glass when not working?
Look, it's another good question. I mean, anything that's good, really, any great wine. But you know, and it depends on the time of year too. I mean, during summer, I love to have, you know, Grosset or Mount Horrocks Rieslings. They're fantastic, and you know, the Hunter Valley Semillons are wonderful. Then you go to Tasmania. I mean, my mother was from Tasmania, so you know, drinking the Arras Sparkling, which I really enjoy at Carr's Wines, and you know, they're making some fantastic Pinot Noirs and Chardonnays from there. you know, from Margaret River, there's some great wines too. I love Mosswood and Woodlands, and you know, it's like and Lewin Estate Chardonnay. There's a lot in Margaret River, but you know, I guess you tend to look also around the world because you're from Australia as well. You know, Burgundy, I just love Burgundy. It's a totally happy place for me, well, for most people really. And of course, Cullen's has a little bit of a Burgundy model. I worked there in 1987 for vintage with the Drouin family, and that was wonderful. You know, great Bordeaux. Look, it's just Alsace. It's just I don't. You go through phases, don't you? Sometimes you just like to drink champagne, or you know. But at the moment, I'm really loving, Tasmanian sparkling wine. I'm just loving that. And also, you know, New Zealand, there's some great Pinot Noirs from New Zealand as well. I had a great Mount Mary 2006 Cabernet Sauvignon the other night my brother brought over, which was great. Yeah, so I think it's just there's a lot of it, and a lot of wonderful wine in Australia, around the world, that, you know, it's always a great pleasure because, you know, it's not a competition. It's about enjoying that sense of place in the wine. And I think, you know, I love Milton wines and Felton Road, you know, that, like those, there's so many biodynamic wines in New Zealand, which are amazing, which give you that connection to, I suppose, I have a preference for wines that have a strong connection to place and people, and to have that, you know, particularly if you've been there, to have that experience with those people. It's really a wonderful thing that, you know, when you know, you can't get to Burgundy or Bordeaux or somewhere, you can, or South Australia, to drink some, you know, Riesling, you can have a cheap holiday and drink at home, you know. So
I think
you can travel the
especially
world.
important. That's especially important in these times when travel is severely limited.
Yeah, exactly. And I think wine is about memory too. You know, when you have a wine that you've had, you have a memory of a time and experience, and it brings you into the now with that memory of time and place. And, you know, of course, wines are always different. You know, you like everything. Every time you taste a bottle, it's going to be different because it's going to have aged a little bit, and, you know, all sorts of things. There might be a fruit or flower day, so there's endless things to enjoy in wine. And that's why I've enjoyed, like, opening wines and then tasting them over, you know, maybe a week or even 2 weeks, and to see how they change. It's really quite wonderful to be able to have the time to do that, because, you know, you're here, you're in one spot. It's really great. And to check out the Biodynamic calendar, see what day it is, see, wow, that's interesting. Yeah, it's good.
Wonderful. So we've had a question come through about the 2010 specifically, and specifically about the colour of the wine. I believe, Freddie, you might have it there. So can you comment on that, please? Sorry, Freddie, I'll just get you.
Sorry, there we go. Apologies. So I've been asked, why no observation on the colour? Why the sunglasses? I'm wearing the sunglasses because it's very sunny and I can't see my computer screen otherwise. I'm making the most of the absolutely glorious weather. So colour-wise, yeah, it's actually it's fairly sort of medium ruby, I would say. Really, it's.
Freddie, can you just hold it a bit higher up? We can't actually see it.
Can you sort of see if I go like that? I mean, you can't. You're not going to be able to see it anyway, but there's my glasses, proof that I actually have it. So yeah, so the 2010, it's looking, it's still looking quite vibrant. It's not turning sort of, you know, there's no sort of brick color at the edges. It's still quite ruby, quite vibrant. It's, yeah, I'd say almost sort of the sort of more pale end of medium intensity in terms of the color. So it's certainly not showing signs of what you might expect from a really full-bodied kind of brutish extracted Cabernet. This is much more clearly a sort of a more elegant, you know, medium-bodied style of wine. So it's yeah, it's certainly a sign as to what you can expect in the glass. There was also a question here about food, because I think I was getting a slap on the wrist for not drinking it with a meal. I will certainly continue to drink this through my lunch at 1 o'clock. But I know that, Vanya, I know that you're vegetarian. However, hopefully you can give us some recommendations about what you might choose to drink it with. For me personally, I would absolutely love to drink this with a nice bit of slow cooked barbecued beef or something like that. It would be really, really lovely. But hopefully Vanya can come up with something that's a little bit more vegetarian friendly than that.
No, it's a classic sort of, that's a classic match with for this wine is beef, is beef or lamb. It's just fantastic, and it's simple, you know. I mean, I love having a beetroot risotto. That's my favorite with this, and I do eat fish, so I love salmon as well. With it, but yeah, I think any root vegetable sort of combination is wonderful, and also eggplant.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're, you know, it's sort of like, it's nice having vegetables. I think the root vegetables sort of tie into the, you know, to the earth elements of Cabernet of these wines, and particularly if they have a little bit of age, they can sort of bring that sort of connection to the earth, to the wine and the food match. So I love that, and it's also love having, you know, a little bit of Parmesan is great, and or you can have some, you know, goat's cheese. There's lots of different things. People have different opinion about cheese and wine. I do like white wine with cheese, you know, the Chardonnays with soft cheeses, but yeah, it's, you know, if I have an older wine like this, well, it's not really old, but it's, you know, 10 years old, you know, it's nice to just sit with a cheese board and just relax and enjoy each glass and have a little bit. That's another way to, you know, when you get through a meal and you have you know, you've had your first, second, and then you get to the cheese, and it's nice just to relax having a great wine like this and enjoy the flavors and think about how it's evolving. So yeah, I don't have you know, pizza's another one that's great, sort of
that would be really nice. Sort of a proper, you know, wood-fired pizza would probably go really, really well with that, actually. But I think you're absolutely right. It's the sort of wine that you can maybe, you know, open the bottle with the main course, whatever that might be, but actually sit and drink it throughout the remainder of the evening.
Yeah.
One of those wines which just develop and change every time you go back to it, which is absolutely wonderful. So I think it's probably more versatile than people might initially think. And
I also do, and I think the biodynamic keeps it very alive, so it is versatile in that way, because it's not closed with sort of heavy tannins and alcohol. Is you know, dark chocolate that's not too sweet, you know, and I've done a few wine food pairings where the restaurants haven't wanted to do cheese, which is a bit of a shame, but chefs sometimes don't like it. So we've done chocolate desserts, which not sweet, but they've been quite good too, you know, so that's another interesting, you can have it through the whole meal. So yeah, I mean, chocolate's another one, because it does have that bitter chocolate middle, which can really sings, and it can match, because of that, it can match with anything. It's really versatile. Yeah. And so you have the classic food and wine pairings, or the, you know, I mean, ratatouille would be another nice thing that'd be really great with it as well.
Yeah, that's a really good call, actually. I'm getting really hungry.
So Vanya, a couple of more questions. There's a couple on the aging of the wines, and we see that we have a couple of back vintages, but the Wine Society has been stocking the wines since 1992, and we actually have one member joining us who has a case still of the 1992 Diana Madeline with them. Another one on the 1996. But a question about the impact of biodynamics on aging, and possibly that and screw cap, just potentially between the two of them, what influence do they have on the longevity of these wines?
Yeah, well, look, I think that's what I was saying, going back, you know, you have to have we talk about biodynamics and keeping the soil healthy and all of that, which I believe is important in terms of going forward with the wines and having that completeness. But having said that, if you go back to the philosophy in the first place, it was always about quality. So, and this, you know, the wines in the 70s were great, the 80s, the 90s, the 92 is one of my favorite vintages. It's a really powerful wine, the Cabernet Sauvignon, very strong tannins, and, you know, very, very in its character, it's a strong wine. I think that the 96 also is, you know, I was asked once, you know, how would I describe all of our, you know, vintages? And I'd say there's you get cool, classic, or hot, and then you get in between those. So you got the 96 is a classic vintage where you have, you know, good yields, classic weather conditions, and very beautifully balanced wines. And I'd say that 2010 in terms of vintage comparison is similar to that, but not with the biodynamic. So we had a bottle of the 96 not that long ago, and it was really, really amazing. And the 92, I haven't had a 92 since last year, but they're all aging really well. And because they were made with, you know, essentially with the Cabernet, we haven't done much to it, because we haven't needed to. We did add yeast, we did, you know, add a bit of acid, we did add, you know, different ways of making, but essentially not much different other than now we don't add anything. So you have a different style of wine in a way, but if you have them in a lineup, they look really similar. So it's really exciting to be able to travel back to the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, and to see those wines which are essentially 100% off place. And you know, they're getting rarer and rarer. We used to be able to buy them back for our restaurant, but it's hard to get the Diana Madeleines or the Cabernet Merlot that they were before 2001 then. So thank you very much, Wine Society, for being with us for that long and staying with us. How wonderful. Isn't it great to have those stories? It's amazing. Yeah.
It is. One thing we're very fortunate is we do have great relationships, and Freddie and all the buyers are very honoured to have that, and we certainly do cherish them. And yeah, relationships with producers like you is something that we love bringing to our members with these virtual events. So we love sharing them with you. So just want to say thank you very much for joining. But before we do sign off, I do have one cheerio from a distant cousin of yours who's joined us today.
Oh.
Andrew Clark, who has been to visit. And we've also had a number of members talk about how this event has brought back memories of their visits to you.
Oh,
in
how wonderful. Oh, that's so lovely. Great. They're really good. I love being able to talk to everybody. It's really nice. Yeah.
If you haven't been to visit, I do encourage you. There's really no excuse now that there is a direct flight from London straight to Perth.
Yeah.
So if you're in Australia and New Zealand, it's a must stop on your way over. As soon as the borders open and flights are reopened and everyone is able to travel, I do strongly encourage you to go visit. Potentially tied in with the big food festival that Margaret River is really turning into a must visit occasion. So hopefully, whilst we won't be able to get there this year, in the future we will be able to get there in the near future.
Oh no, it's fantastic. And also they opened the Margaret River Airport just before COVID closed it down. So that's another option to be able to fly direct from Melbourne to Margaret River. So that'll all be opening up as well. So we'd love to welcome everybody back and sit on the veranda, have some wine and some food and have a relax. How good would that be? Fantastic. We look forward to it.
Sounds ideal. I can't wait.
Yeah. Yeah, no, really nice. Well, it's like it'll happen.
It'll happen. Well, that's great. That hopefully means that we won't have to do the very dull drive from Perth, which is about 3 hours on a one sort of long straight road, isn't it? So it's much easier.
That's right. No, just fly straight in from, and hopefully it'll be international at some stage because there's an international landing pad. So that's what they're heading. So that'd be really, really amazing if that does happen. Yeah.
Well, Vanya, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I'm sure I can speak for everyone.
Thank you.
I say that it was absolutely fascinating. Great to see you. A great excuse for me to have a absolutely bloody delicious glass of wine on a weekday lunchtime. So that's just been a complete joy in itself. But no, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure. And as Tim said, we feel really privileged to be able to have the relationships with winemakers such as yourself at the Wine Society. So it's been great. So I'd just like to sort of raise my glass to you.
Well, raise my glass to all of you. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you everyone for tuning in. So Tim, thanks for organising as well, and the tastings team. Really appreciate it.
It's our pleasure.
Thank you so much, everybody. Yeah,
Thank you.
that's great. And have a good rest of the day.
Enjoy the sunshine, everyone.
Enjoy the sunshine. Yeah. Thanks so much for organising it, everybody. That was wonderful.
Cheers.
Yeah, great to talk.